I committed arson, went outside. Now it's time to check the comments on my latest video. Sure, why not? I've been looking for an excuse to read this anyway.
Hell has always been a part of video games and media in general, whether it be inspired by hell or just straight up hell. And while hell isn't in every game ever made, many tropes from our contemporary depiction of hell are used in something even like Mario. Ever wonder why usually the final world or one of the final worlds of a Mario game involves lava in some way? The reason this is because we, for whatever reason, associate things such as fire and lava with difficulty. Even simply colors on the warm side of the color spectrum are associated with challenging gameplay. And this is a common theme with games like Hades, Doom, Geometry Dash, in which the hell style is a popular trend, Mario, and even the Elder Scrolls.
And why is this the way it is? Well, I'm going to try to break down exactly why people see hell as a sign of difficulty in video games, and also try to figure out what makes a good hell level in a video game. And who knows, maybe talking about hell will help me get to it faster. I mean, the world record is 50 minutes and 82 seconds, but with determination and a questionable lifestyle, I can do this.
Let's start off with something obvious. The fear of fire and intense heat, pyrophobia, is a very common one. In fact, most sane people are at the very least decently cautious when around extreme temperatures. This could very easily explain why heat-related things are connected to difficult levels in video games and difficult games in general. However, that's assuming that every depiction of hell has something to do with extreme heat. In fact, the legendary works of Dante Alighieri in the Divine Comedy, specifically the Inferno section, he depicts the lowest level of hell, which is where Satan and the treacherous reside, as cold and icy. While hell is almost always associated with extreme temperatures, that doesn't mean that those extreme temperatures have to be high. And typically, people also try to avoid extremely low temperatures as well. Unless you're me.
Nice.
So why do most video games prefer to use a more fiery hell as opposed to that of an icy hell? Well, I think the answer to that is actually quite simple. Heat is simply more intimidating than the cold. For example, which would be more intimidating? A wall of fire or a wall of ice? Heat can kill you much quicker than the cold can. On top of that, death by heat is typically significantly more painful than death by freezing. Another thing to keep in mind when discussing the topic of hell in video games is that not every version of hell seen is actually, well, hell. Locations such as Minecraft's The Netherrealm, Hades and Hades, and the Underworld and Doom Eternal are all prime examples of hell just being hell. The way they're presented is definitely cool, but they aren't exactly unique. Some examples of Underworld-type areas that have nothing to do with fiery stuff include Giratina's Distortion World in Pokemon Platinum, the depths of Mementos in Persona 5, the Geometry Dash level of Yandere, the Binding of Isaac's The Basement, and Spiritfarer's depiction of the river Styx. All of these games show the Underworld as something completely different than most people's preconceived notion. While a hell setting can be really cool if done right, I've always appreciated more unique versions of the Underworld. That being said, a unique depiction of hell does not automatically make a good hell setting or theme. And in video games specifically, the hell theme and style can also be reflected in the gameplay. The music also plays a huge role. Imagine playing Doom with this. So with all these things combined, what exactly makes a good hell level in video games?
The first thing to do to help us answer this question is to look at examples of good hell levels and settings. And what better game to start with than the game that has made me say some things that probably will lead me to the Underworld, Geometry Dash.
Some of the first quote-unquote Hell Geometry Dash levels was Son 0924's The Hell Blank series. Some of these levels include the Hell Zone, World Trinity, and too many more. Why are there so many of these garbage levels? I don't know, ask God. Considering these levels were made extremely early in the game's lifespan, you could probably imagine that they don't look very hellish. The music also doesn't fit the hell style at all. I mean, I guess it does depending on what type of person you are. If you really hate Waterflame, then oh boy do I have good news for you. Well, what about the gameplay? Despite the actual level design being abominable from a fun standpoint, I guess the heavily timing-based gameplay is the closest thing we've gotten to hellish. Playing these levels is absolute agony, so in that respect, kind of. However, outside of the levels being really horrible to play, there really isn't anything that screams hell to me. The remakes by Stormfly definitely improved the visual department by a lot, but everything else is almost identical. So what is an example of a good hell-themed Geometry Dash level? Firstly, we have by far the most unique level of the bunch, being a mega collab verified by Dorami, the Yandere. This is a perfect example of a hell style, hell song, and hell gameplay meshing together in a very unique way. This level depicts hell as pure chaos, and it succeeds with flying colors. Visually, making a level based on a game where you play as a Japanese schoolgirl who kills for the sake of love feel hellish is more challenging than it sounds. What makes the Yandere feel hellish isn't the fact that it takes place in hell, but instead the fact that it's a level themed around a person who will probably end up playing chess with Satan quite often. And this is still the only time I've ever seen this style implemented into anything, really. And it makes you think, how many other ways can the hell style be implemented without hell itself? The song of the Yandere stays true to its established theme of chaos consistently throughout the whole level. Specifically, its use of piano is truly something incredible and fits the name of the song itself. The gameplay is, once again, pure chaos with some difficult timings thrown in there. In fact, I'd say the gameplay does a better job of showcasing a person's descent to madness even than the visuals and song. It starts off slow, ramps up with the piano. With Jonathan GD's part, it slows down and focuses more on timing, and then amps up to levels I could have never predicted. This does a very good job of imitating how I imagine the human mind operates when committing such awful acts such as, well, murder. To me, Jonathan's part represents the first kill, which I assume would be the hardest both physically and mentally. After that, it just gets easier and easier, and then it's rampage time.
Why hello there, my name's Arkthepenguin, and I have been told that I need to clarify that I have never taken the life of anyone. I think.
To me, while levels like Avernus and Bloodlust definitely align with how most people imagine Hell to look, the Yandere's approach is much deeper and unique. Another level that I feel executes the Hell style very well is Slaughterhouse. While it doesn't tell a story like the Yandere, it still holds strong with the chaotic theme, which I talked about before. However, not every Hell-themed level should be chaotic. A level like Yatagarasu is the longest level I've mentioned thus far, and overall I would argue is the most mentally challenging. I also got to appreciate the fact that it's based off of a Japanese legend of a three-legged crow, which is not what my mind would go to when I think of Hell. The song also fits the style very well. It manages to keep the intimidating feel of Hell, while also adding some echoey parts that remind you of its sky-roaming mascot. Alright, well there's Geometry Dash, but what about another popular platforming game? Mario. Well, consistently since his debut on the NES, in Super Mario Bros., the final world, or at least one of the final worlds, is connected to lava or fire in some way. And although it isn't hell, it still falls under the theme I've been talking about. I think of it more as a hellish castle. The final worlds in Mario games have always fittingly been the hardest. This has been a thing for pretty much all video games since the beginning of games. The difficulty slowly increasing is a way to keep the player engaged. Whenever you first start the game, your skills are far from adequate. But as the game progresses and you get a feel for the controls, you're presented with more challenging obstacles. And for whatever reason, those challenging obstacles are usually associated with third-degree burns. The lava-themed levels are always very good at making the player feel a healthy amount of stress. I mean, you can't cremate turtles without a little bit of anxiety. Speaking of which, Bowser is a giant spiky turtle who in some of the games has a floating castle. Why is he associated with fire and lava?
To be fair, some of the best arsonists I've ever known were turtles.
Moving on from that, a game I got recently, Hades, is set in, well, you know, hell. Granted, it is Greek hell, but, you know, it's still hell. What sets Hades apart from other hell-themed games is the fact that it's actually a roguelike, a genre I've never really played before. The basic gist of the game is that you are Hades' son, Zephyr, and you have had enough of hell. It's not a phase, Dad! And you have to go through randomly generated rooms of enemies to try and fight your way to the top. During each of these attempts, you will collect loot, which you can use to upgrade Zephyr. You can also gain some abilities of other Olympian gods, such as Poseidon, Zeus, and even the god of wine, for some reason. However, much like Geometry Dash, there are no save points in each section of the game, meaning that if you die, you have to start all over again. And Hades, well, let's just say it's not a cakewalk. Very similar to the Yandere, this does a very good job at encapsulating a feeling of insanity. You're trying the same thing over and over again, inching closer to your goal every time you try. However, rather than being pure chaos, Hades' gameplay displays a much more methodical insanity. There is an order to things. I will say though, while I really do like the other characters and how you can grow your relationships with them, I do feel like it can kind of take away from the idea of hell being this unbearable place. A feeling of isolation is one I definitely associate with hell. A feeling Hades doesn't really give. Even when you leave the other people, you consistently have encounters with gods and residents of hell. A game that also struggles with the feeling of isolation is Doom. Despite the fact that you're literally alone for the entire game, you never really have time to focus on that. If you aren't blasting demons, you're solving puzzles. And if you aren't solving puzzles, you're traversing the world. You're always doing something in Doom, which is a very good thing from a game design perspective because, well, you're never bored. And even more so than that, every task you're given is fun in some capacity. It just fails in the isolated atmosphere part. However, that's not to say that the Doom games are bad pieces of hell media. For one, the setting isn't actually hell. The basic premise is that you're on Mars, and quite literally, all of hell was let loose. Because of this, it manages to feel like hell, but unique enough to keep me interested. Secondly, there's the combat, which, yeah, the sheer number of enemies that come in each wave is just enough so you feel that slight tingle in your stomach, but not so many that you get stressed out and quit the game. This, accompanied by the intense heavy metal soundtrack that plays in every combat encounter, once again shows the obvious connection between the ideas of hell and chaos. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, we have the depths of Mementos in Persona 5. While this dungeon doesn't make you feel alone due to the other party members, it does a few things that I really wish more media would do. The depths of Mementos are treated like a tragic thing. Rather than having intense, chaotic music like most other Hell games or levels, Persona 5 opts for an uncomfortably eerie yet melancholy track. The echoey percussion also gives you the feeling that this place is infinite. Even the name of the track, Freedom and Peace, showcases the ideology of those who reside in the depths. If they don't have to think for themselves, and they are free from all worldly responsibilities and can forever be at peace. Another thing that I love about this dungeon is the idea that everyone in it chose to be there. And this is an idea that the game really focuses on. In fact, it's pretty much the entire takeaway from the dungeon. These people didn't necessarily do anything specific to lead to them being trapped in the depths. They made a subconscious decision to give up the part of them that has the ability to think freely. Further in, it even covers the idea of people not wanting anyone but themselves to think. But my absolute favorite thing about this dungeon is the fact that it's treated like a tragedy by the heroes. So many people see hell as a good thing because it's punishment for those who deserve it. The cast of Persona 5, on the other hand, mourns the fact that these people were going to be trapped in the depths forever if they hadn't stepped in. Even those who they see as horrible people, such as Kaneshiro, Kamoshida, Madarame, Shido, they lament the fact that they chose this path. Persona 5's final dungeon is my personal favorite hell level of all time, just because of the philosophical questions it presented. Is hell just a punishment, or should we treat the fact that there are those who decide to take the course of action to lead them to hell as a tragedy? Perhaps it's both. Persona 5 took after Dante's Inferno in this way. What about a game with hell elements without actually taking place in hell or anything resembling the underworld?
Well, let me introduce you to the most toxic relationship I've ever been in. Dark Souls.
There are definitely some hell-like locations in every Soulsborne game, and definitely some demon-y enemies, but the main hellish aspect of Dark Souls has to do with the main concept, which is very similar to that of Hades. However, Dark Souls is also a significantly harder game than Hades. And keep in mind, Hades is not an easy game, and this definitely makes playing Dark Souls feel more like hell than most other games that actually take place in hell.
So what is the answer to what is a good hell level or setting? Oh, don't ask me, I'm just a guy who owns cars.
The way I see it, what makes a good hell level is entirely up to the individual. One person might see the Geometry Dash level Tartarus as the greatest depiction of hell in video games, while another sees Doom as the best. There are some that will even say that some of the levels in games that I brought up don't even count as hell-themed. And that's okay. What you see as a good setting and theme is entirely up to you, and no one else. I, however, prefer a hell level that makes you think deeper about what hell actually is. Is it eternal pain and suffering, endless isolation, the sequel to Boss Baby? All questions that need to be asked. And I do genuinely think that asking these questions, especially if you believe that hell actually exists, will benefit you in the future. Granted, that is advice coming from a guy who spent his Monday evening watching Zombievers, so what do I know?
Well, that sure was a fun time, getting to explore all sorts of levels and games that use hell, but also trying to understand why hell is such an important part of mythology, media, and even our own understanding of morality. Speaking of a fun time, looks like my Uber should be here any second now. You know, now that I think about it, that explains a lot.